So in this session, we're going to talk about four main types of rubrics. And so what's nice about rubrics is that it can be very much adapted to your needs and also how you kind of approach your course. And so we want to give you a chance to look at these different types of rubrics and see some examples so that you can determine what might be most appropriate for your context. So the first type is what's known as a holistic scale rubric, which allows the rater to assign a single score based on the overall quality or their overall judgment of the student's work. And so this might be kind of analogous to just assigning a letter grade to an entire piece of work. You get an A, B, C, D, or F. Like those are holistic categories, and every aspect of their performance is sort of subsumed within that. And so these rubrics include global indicators, but it can be somewhat difficult for students to understand maybe how they performed on individual pieces, or for you to tease out how they performed on, say, the analysis component versus the following instructions on the structure of it. It's all kind of combined in there. And so these can be very helpful, but they don't always give you the great deal of specificity for where the students need to grow. Another type of rubric, which can be, some people like because they think of it as more objective, are checklist rubrics. So these just include a variety of criteria that are dichotomous, and either they did it or they didn't. So did they write 6 pages or did they not? Did they include 5 works referenced or did they not? And so for that way, it's very easy to just, go through and say they did or they didn't for each of the criteria you've selected. And so that's helpful, but it may not provide, again, substantive information regarding performance levels, and that you can't really, it's harder to get into some of the nuances of student performance using a checklist, because it can be hard for some things to really show, did they have no analysis or do they have great analysis? That's not really getting into those gray areas in between. And so that's a limitation of a checklist rubric as well. Another type of rubric is what's known as a rating scales rubric, where you can identify a range of performance without providing specific descriptors for what performance in that level means. So in this example, you have a below expectations, a meets expectations, and an exceeds expectations, with general descriptors of what those mean, but without specific information about what that performance looks like for the given criteria. And so this can be quick to develop, but it may not provide sufficient information for raters to really score students' work consistently. And again, it may not provide students with enough substantive information for how they should be improving their work to get a better assessment. And then the final type of rubric that we wanted to talk about are what's known as analytic scale rubrics. And so this seems to be like the type that was described earlier in the session. And in this type of rubric, you are articulating the specific levels of performance for every criteria. So if you're talking about the artifacts that were included in the portfolio, you have descriptions for what poor looks like, what fair, what good, and what great performance looks like. And so each criteria has more descriptions. And so scoring using these types of rubrics can be more consistent because it's very clear, or there's more description about what that score signifies in terms of student work. But one of the drawbacks of this is that it does take time to develop, because you do have to describe each, describe each level of performance for the criteria. And so it can take more time, but it can be really beneficial. And so that is a kind of snapshot overview of 4 different types of rubrics that might be helpful for you, both in terms of classroom assessment, but also in terms of program assessment.